In the winter winds of 192 BC, history tried to forget a war that almost rewrote the fate of the ancient world. A proud empire, a rising superpower, and a single decision that set both on a collision course. This is the story Rome didn't want remembered. This is the war powerful men tried to bury. Before we begin, subscribe, because more forgotten battles are coming. Like the video to support real history, and write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see our history family around the world. By the early 2nd century BC, Rome stood undefeated. They had crushed Carthage, they had humbled Greece. But far to the east rose another giant, the Seleucid Empire, descendants of Alexander the Great's generals. A realm stretching from Asia Minor to the borders of India. Wealthy, ambitious, dangerous, and at its head stood Antiochus III. Antiochus the Great! He dreamed not only of restoring Alexander's world, he dreamed of challenging Rome. For years, the Seleucids watched Rome expand westward, swallowing lands Antiochus believed belonged to him. When Greek city-states invited him to liberate them from Roman interference, he saw his moment. But Rome saw something else, a threat. What began as diplomacy twisted into suspicion. Suspicion hardened into hostility, and then a spark. A single campaign would ignite one of antiquity's most decisive yet forgotten wars. Rome's warning. The Roman Senate sent a clear message to Antiochus. Stay out of Greece. But Antiochus crossed the sea anyway, not with a huge army, but with a symbolic one. He thought the Greeks would rally to him. He believed Rome would hesitate. He was wrong. Rome marched, not only soldiers, but a reputation built on fear. Veterans hardened by a lifetime of war, commanders who had faced Hannibal himself. And yet Antiochus believed he could beat them. He had war elephants. He had phalanxes trained in the Macedonian tradition. He had allies from across Asia. He had one more thing Rome underestimated: pride. The two powers finally collided in Greece. Cold mountain passes, narrow terrain. Antiochus took high ground, confident he had the advantage. But Roman discipline was different. They did not rely on gigantic formations alone. They adapted, they maneuvered. They cut the Seleucid lines piece by piece. Antiochus was shocked. The battle did not destroy his empire, but it exposed a terrifying truth. Rome was no ordinary enemy. From that moment forward, the war could no longer be stopped. It would spread beyond Greece, across seas into Asia, dragging cities, kings, mercenaries, and entire cultures into its fire. And at the center stood one question. Could the Seleucid Empire survive Rome's advance, or would another great power fall into silence? This war would reshape boundaries, break alliances and dynasties, and yet, textbooks barely whisper its name, because the victors wrote the story, and Rome chose not to remember. The Roman Senate did not panic. They did something far more dangerous. They planned. To Rome, Antiochus was not just another king. He represented a return to chaos, to massive Hellenistic empires rising again and threatening Roman influence. And Rome had learned a brutal lesson from Hannibal. Never let your enemy grow stronger. Strike early, strike hard. So Rome appointed commanders with experience, men who had survived the Punic Wars, and sent them east with a mission: drive Antiochus out of Greece. Crush his prestige. Show the world that resisting Rome meant extinction, but the Greeks themselves were divided. Some city-states believed Antiochus was a liberator, a champion of Greek independence. Others saw him as just another conqueror replacing Rome with another empire. The greatest of these groups were the Aetolians, proud, stubborn, and resentful of Roman dominance. They invited Antiochus with promises: bring your army, Greece will rise for you. But when he arrived, he discovered a bitter truth. Greece wanted freedom, not another master. His army was smaller than expected, his resources limited. And worst of all, Rome was already on the move. Antiochus retreated to the mountain pass of Thermopylae, the legendary site where King Leonidas and 300 Spartans once stood against Persia. This place carried symbolism. It whispered of miracles, of heroic last stands. Maybe, Antiochus thought, history could repeat itself. He fortified the hillsides. His troops dug trenches. Archers took positions. Elephants waited behind the lines like living fortresses. The message was clear. If Rome wants Greece, they must bleed for it. When the Roman legions appeared, dust rising behind them like a living storm, they did not rush forward. They studied. They remembered what had happened to the Persians centuries before, and Rome refused to walk blindly into a trap. So instead of charging the past, they did what Rome did best. They outthought the enemy. While one Roman force engaged Antiochus from the front, another unit secretly climbed the mountain paths. They flanked his defenses, storming positions the Seleucids believed were secure. Panic erupted. The carefully prepared line shattered. War elephants rampaged in confusion. Men broke formation, desperate to escape. Antiochus himself barely escaped with his life, retreating across the sea, humiliated, shocked, and suddenly aware. He had underestimated Rome completely. Word spread fast. Kings, cities, merchants all heard what happened at Thermopylae, and something dangerous began to happen. Allies started to hesitate. Vassals began reconsidering loyalty. Neutral states leaned toward Rome. Because in the ancient world, alliances followed victory, not ideology. And Rome was winning. But Rome was not satisfied with victory in Greece. They wanted guarantees that Antiochus could never threaten them again. So they made a decision that would change the map of the Mediterranean. They would carry the war into Asia Minor, straight into Seleucid territory. This wasn't just retaliation. This was a message. Anyone who challenges Rome will be hunted to the ends of the earth. As Roman fleets crossed the Aegean Sea, as legions marched through unfamiliar lands, one thing became clear. This was no longer a border conflict. This was a campaign to break an empire. And somewhere deep inside his court, surrounded by advisors and generals, Antiochus realized something chilling. He was no longer playing for glory. He was fighting for survival. For the Seleucid Empire, the news struck like thunder. Antiochus had lost in Greece. The Romans were coming east, and suddenly, the empire that once stretched proudly across continents felt fragile. Inside the royal court, voices clashed. Some urged negotiation, others demanded total war. But pride and fear of appearing weak drove Antiochus forward. To retreat without a fight would invite rebellion, betrayals, and civil war. To many nobles, Rome was just another Western power, overrated and arrogant. They would soon learn otherwise. Rome builds a coalition. Rome rarely fought alone. As their legions prepared to move deeper into Asia Minor, they forged alliances, not with love but with promises and threats. The most important ally was Pergamon, ruled by King Eumenes II. Small compared to the Seleucids, but wealthy, strategic, and eager for revenge. The Seleucids had long overshadowed Pergamon. Now Eumenes saw an opportunity to cripple a rival and win Rome's favor. Together they coordinated strategy. Roman legions on land, Pergamene fleets at sea, supply lines secured, intelligence shared. This was not the chaotic warfare of earlier Greek states. This was organized, methodical, terrifyingly efficient. Antiochus prepares for counterstrike. Antiochus knew he needed control of the sea. Without ships, Rome could land anywhere. They could bypass fortresses, cut off food, starve cities into submission. So he mobilized his navy, a mixture of Greek-style triremes, heavier warships, and experienced sailors. But here lay another problem. His admirals were divided. His fleets were scattered, communication lagged, and Rome was learning faster than expected. Several skirmishes turned disastrous. Seleucid fleets were beaten back, weakening Antiochus's ability to protect his coasts. Still, he refused to surrender. The people pay the price. While kings strategized, ordinary people suffered. Villages were emptied, farmers abandoned fields, merchants fled to safer ports. War consumed everything: grain, livestock, manpower, and whispers of famine began to spread. Refugees walked roads once used by traders and scholars. For many, the Seleucid War wasn't about empires or glory. It was about survival. The Roman consuls moved carefully, step by step, capturing cities, cutting off strongholds, and forcing local rulers to choose sides. Many surrendered quickly, not out of loyalty, but because they believed Rome was the future. The Seleucid Empire no longer inspired confidence. It inspired fear and uncertainty. Each surrender isolated Antiochus further. His commanders warned him, "If we don't win a decisive battle soon, we will lose without one." So Antiochus made his choice. He would gather his best troops, deploy his war elephants, call upon the elite phalanx, the weapon that once conquered the world under Alexander. He believed one massive confrontation could still turn the tide, a single crushing victory. As winter turned to spring, Both armies moved toward the plains near Magnesia, a quiet region whose name would soon echo through history. Roman scouts observed Seleucid preparations. Pergamene riders reported troop movements. The battlefield slowly took shape. Rome brought disciplined legions, battle-hardened officers, and tactical flexibility. Antiochus brought numbers, elephants, chariots, archers, heavy cavalry, and the pride of an empire. Two worlds, two military philosophies, two destinies colliding. But somewhere in the silence before battle, even Antiochus felt the weight of doubt. He wasn't just fighting Rome. He was fighting time, politics, fear, and the ghosts of Alexander's legacy that haunted every king who followed. Because if he lost here, he wouldn't just lose a war. He would lose the future of his empire. Dawn crept slowly across the plains near Magnesia. Mist clung to the ground, soldiers whispered prayers. Commanders rode silently through the ranks, hiding their fears behind hardened faces. Both armies knew what happened here would decide the fate of the Eastern Mediterranean. There would be no second chance. The armies face each other. On one side stood Rome, not the biggest army, but one forged through discipline. Their legions formed solid blocks of infantry, each man trained to move, rotate, and adapt like parts of a living machine. Behind them, reserves waited. On the flanks, cavalry stood ready. They had fewer troops than the Seleucids, but Rome rarely needed more. Across the field stretched the immense army of Antiochus the Great. Phalanxes formed walls of spears, towering like a forest of steel. Armored cavalry glittered in the weak sunlight. Archers stood ready, and at the edges stomped the massive shadows of war elephants, symbols of power meant to crush Roman morale. From a distance, it looked as though the Seleucids could swallow Rome whole. And that is what Antiochus believed. Before the signal was given, commanders spoke to their men. Roman officers reminded their soldiers of their legacy: Hannibal defeated, Carthage humbled, enemies across the world brought to heel. They promised victory, glory, and safety for Rome. Antiochus spoke of honor, of restoring the greatness of Alexander, of driving the Romans back to the west where they belonged. But behind his words lived something darker. If he failed, his empire would fracture. And kings who feared losing power often fought not with strategy, but with desperation. The battle began with thunder. Antiochus ordered his chariots, scythed war machines fitted with spinning blades, to charge the Roman lines. They tore across the plain, kicking up clouds of dust meant to slice through formations and create terror. But Rome did not panic. Trumpets signaled, ranks opened, javelins flew. The charioteers fell, horses broke, and the scythed wheels spun uselessly into the dirt. Antiochus frowned. His opening surprise had failed. Next came the war elephants, driven toward the Roman flanks. Their tusks were armored, their heads painted, making them look like monsters from myth. For a moment they seemed unstoppable, but Rome had prepared. Rather than fight the beasts head-on, Roman skirmishers targeted their handlers. Arrows and javelins flew, elephants panicked, and some turned, crashing back into Seleucid lines, spreading chaos. Across the field, orders vanished under noise and confusion. The Seleucid lines shook. Sensing weakness, Roman commanders moved with precision. Legions advanced, shields raised, swords ready. They didn't simply charge. They pressed, step by step, forcing the massive phalanx backwards. And here an ancient truth revealed itself. The phalanx was powerful when stable, but helpless when broken. Once the formation began to bend, gaps opened. Roman soldiers slipped in, striking from the sides, cutting down spearmen who could not turn fast enough. Antiochus watched with growing alarm. His greatest weapon, the formation that had conquered kingdoms, was being dismantled piece by piece. Seeing disaster forming, Antiochus made a bold decision. He personally led his elite cavalry in a daring charge against the Roman right flank. For a brief moment, it worked. Rome staggered, dust rose. Men fell. But instead of chasing the opening carefully, Antiochus pushed too far, riding past the battlefield in pursuit of fleeing units. And in doing so, he abandoned the center at the worst possible moment. With their king gone from command, confusion spread, and Rome was about to exploit it. Because for the legions, this wasn't personal, it was systematic. They were here to end a war. The battlefield at Magnesia had become a storm of dust, steel, and screams. Signals were lost, orders clashed, and every mistake multiplied. With Antiochus chasing down scattered Roman cavalry, the heart of his army was suddenly leaderless. the most dangerous state an army can face. The phalanx starts to crumble at the center. The towering Seleucid phalanx tried to hold formation. Row after row of long sarissas bristled outward like a deadly wall. For a moment, it seemed they might stabilize the line. But Rome refused to fight on Seleucid terms. Instead of throwing themselves at the spear points, legionaries maneuvered around the flanks, slipping into every gap, hacking shields, stabbing at exposed sides. The phalanx, built for slow forward motion, struggled to react. It needed unity to survive. Unity, the one thing the Seleucid army no longer had. Then disaster struck again. Panicked elephants, wounded and enraged, rampaged back through their own troops. Soldiers dove for cover. Lines buckled. Commanders tried to shout orders, but no one could hear them over the thunder of hooves and screaming animals. What began as a display of imperial strength became pure chaos. The Roman commanders saw it instantly. Trumpets sounded, banners waved. The legions pushed forward with deadly precision. Every step was calculated. They pressed the Seleucids backward, trapping sections of infantry between elephants, comrades, and advancing Roman steel. Soon the battlefield was no longer a contest, it was a collapse. When Antiochus finally rode back toward the main fight, what he saw shattered him. His once mighty army and the pride of an empire was dissolving. Some units fought courageously, others fled. Many simply threw down shields, choosing survival over loyalty. He tried to rally them, shouting commands, waving banners, but panic had become stronger than his voice. A king without control is just another man. Realizing the battle could not be saved, Antiochus ordered a retreat, not to regroup, but to escape annihilation. When the dust settled, the devastation was clear. Tens of thousands were dead or captured. Commanders lost, armies shattered. The Seleucid military, once feared across the east, would never fully recover. Rome, meanwhile, had proven something terrible. They could defeat the greatest successor states of Alexander, not through luck, but through discipline and strategy. And the world was watching. Rulers from Egypt, Asia Minor, and even beyond began to understand Rome was not just another power. Rome was becoming destiny. What followed was not mercy. Rome dictated the peace. Antiochus was forced to give up lands in Asia Minor, surrender war elephants, pay a crushing indemnity, and hand over hostages, including his own son. His empire shrank. His treasury bled, internal rebellions grew bolder. He had lost not only territory, he had lost prestige. And prestige in the ancient world was sometimes more valuable than armies. The Seleucid War didn't end with a glorious duel or heroic last stand. It ended with exhaustion, shattered dreams, and the slow realization that the age of Hellenistic superempires was fading. Rome had crossed the sea, and nothing would ever be the same. Yet somehow history buried this moment beneath louder stories and bigger legends. But for those who lived through it, the message was clear. Empires don't fall overnight. They crack, they weaken, and sometimes they break on a battlefield no one remembers. When the fires of Magnesia faded, the world was quieter, but it was not at peace. What Rome had done was more than win a battle. They had set a precedent. From that point onward, kingdoms across the Mediterranean looked at Rome not as a partner, but as a force that would eventually decide their fate. In the years that followed, the Seleucid Empire struggled like a wounded animal. Taxation increased to pay Rome's demands. Rebellions erupted in distant provinces. Generals turned ambitious, governors turned corrupt. Antiochus III, once called the Great, saw his authority crumble. He tried to restore order, to rebuild prestige, to prove the empire was still alive. But fate had one final humiliation in store. While campaigning in the east, trying desperately to refill his treasuries, Antiochus was killed, not in glorious battle, but during a raid gone wrong. The king who dreamed of empire died chasing money. Meanwhile, Rome didn't seize everything immediately. They didn't yet want to rule the entire east, only to control it from afar. They placed allies in strategic positions, enforced treaties, and ensured that no power could rise strong enough to challenge them again. It was subtle, clever, almost invisible. Wherever Rome walked, independence began to look like illusion. So why is this war rarely told? Because Rome preferred stories of heroism, of great victories against mighty enemies like Hannibal. The Seleucid War was different. It was calculated, clinical, almost cold, a reminder that Rome didn't always win through bravery. Sometimes they won through pressure, politics, and patience. Victors write history, and sometimes they choose silence. But beyond empires and treaties, there were other stories, quieter ones, lost in the dust of time. Families who never saw their sons again, villages burned, cities shattered by debt and tribute. For ordinary people, the Seleucid War was not forgotten. It lived in scars, ruins, and graves. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy. History remembers conquerors. It forgets the people who lived beneath them. A world changed forever. By the time the war truly ended, everything was different. The Seleucid Empire staggered on, weakened, splintered, and destined for collapse. Within generations, it would fracture completely, swallowed by rivals and eventually erased by Rome's growing shadow. The Mediterranean world shifted. Rome now had confidence, experience, and a clear path eastward. The road toward later conquests, Macedonia, Greece again, Asia, and beyond, had been paved at Magnesia. This was the moment when Rome realized, we can cross oceans, we can crush empires, and the world cannot stop us. And that realization was far more dangerous than any army. The Seleucid War may be buried beneath larger legends, but it remains one of history's turning points, proof of how fragile even the greatest powers can be. Because in 192 BC, a mighty empire looked invincible, until Rome arrived. And when it was over, all that remained were broken promises, divided kingdoms, and a warning echoing through time. No empire is too great to fall. And no victory is too small to change the world.